Siblings are our partners and rivals, our first friends, and our first enemies. Today on rLounge, we see how siblings tend to bring the best and the worst out in each other. There's nothing like some good old-fashioned sibling rivalry. This is part one of a two-part saga. I warned my brother not to buy that Dodge. Now, he's blaming me for not letting him use my truck. This is going to be long and inevitably tick some people off, either from my personal views on cars or from my idiot brother. So throw away a count just because I don't want to get in a debate about either. But to start off with, I refuse to buy anything Chrysler. They look fantastic, but their quality control is not good for most of their vehicles. And they don't last unless you put a lot of money into them. Several people I know bought one and regretted it. Overall though, this post is going to be half about a problem child of a truck, and half about my idiot brother. Feel free to call me condescending if you like. I really don't care. And for those who want to ask me why I keep helping my brother when I got no appreciation, I no longer am. This is pretty much the final nail in the coffin. My older brother has always acted like he knows best because he is older by a shade under 2 years. Our parents did well raising us both as equally as possible, but my brother, after he moved out on his own, got a swelled ego that just kept getting bigger. An apt description is to call him a Chad wannabe, I suppose. But I've only owned vehicles I thought would be reliable, like my 03 Toyota Tundra that I bought nearly 3 years ago. It's got a 4.7 V8 engine and over 250,000 miles on the odometer. Yet it still drives fantastic. I paid $6,000 for it when I got it, and while my brother is a Chad, he's not one that's swimming in money, but what money he does have, he doesn't use very wisely. He's also got a 5-year-old daughter with his ex-girlfriend and has to pay child support, so he lives with a friend in a rundown house that's perpetually full of people smoking pot and eating Doritos. We're pretty sure he's helping his friend grow pot and sell it too. His ex won't let their daughter anywhere near that house either. So whenever it's my brother's time for visitation, his daughter goes to our parents' house, and they adore her. She's a very good kid, but my brother often uses her as an excuse to try and get his way on things, which you'll see later. Of all things, I guess my getting a truck really ticked my brother off. He was driving a Subaru Baja that worked just fine, but I guess the big brother has to have the bigger vehicle, or he feels like he's not a winner. I swear, he's had to turn everything into a pissing contest and try to one-up me on everything since I was 18. For example, when I decided to get in better shape and started working out to build some muscle, he decided he was going to become Thor. That's how far he tries to take things. He went out and sold the Baja, then splurged on an 01 black Dodge Ram 1500 4x4 that I warned him not to buy, and he acted so proud of it. I suppose it had been okay if he had got a Ram with a Cummins diesel in it, but no. He got a complete piece of crap that was already way worn out. When he showed me the ad, I looked it over and told him flat out, do not buy this truck. The paint was really rough and worn away, especially on the hood. Dents everywhere, lots of rust, and there were a few other red flags that I pointed out. He acted like I'd ruined his day, and then he called the truck's worn out appearance patina, which I joked was a good name for the truck. He really didn't like it though. I warned him that he should get a Toyota, a Ford, or a Chevy, because they all made much better trucks. But no, he went out and bought that worn out Ram with over 200,000 miles on it. And yes, he overpaid. Or at least in my opinion he did. He got it for $3,000. He said he didn't want a boy truck like my Tundra, he wanted a man's truck like a Ram. I warned him that the truck was going to fall apart, but he dismissed me. The truck itself was slightly lifted. The rims were rattle can painted matte black. It had a rusty and dented steel aftermarket front bumper with a broken winch that had to be cut off with a saw because the bolts were so rusted. The paint was really bad. The rockers were basically gone from rust. The dash was cracking. The interior looked like there was a knife fight in it. The suspension squeaked a lot, and the tires were worn. I took a ride with him in it, and the shocks felt like they were completely dead. The transmission was slow to shift, and it needed a tune-up. And as much as I thought my brother was an idiot, I did want him to at least feel happy with his purchase since he already got the truck. So I helped him work on the Ram. I'm no mechanic, but I could swap some parts. My brother opted to try and fix the rust and paint the truck. One of his friends who owed him a favor knows how to weld and has a shop we could use. They used some scrap metal to jerry-rig some new homemade rockers on the sides and make patches anywhere there was bad rust that had to be cut out. Not sure how the guy did it. And it was a mix of recycled sheet metal and cut tubing, but it could have been worse looking. For painting the truck, my brother originally wanted to use a cheap Rust-Oleum paint, but that crap doesn't set right and doesn't last. So I made him get a better brand of paint. It was just some single-stage black paint primer in one. I painted practically that whole truck with a $20 Harbor Freight spray gun, and I'm not dissing on the spray gun. Dang thing actually worked pretty well. My brother and his friend handled sanding the frame and redoing the undercoating with spray paint. They had to weld a few rust patches in the frame as well. My brother put in some used aftermarket headlights he found online, which were cheap junk that I knew wouldn't stay looking nice for very long, but he refused to get OEM style ones. He fitted a junkyard cold air intake despite my protests, and went out of his way to install a CB radio that he never used, and he put on a bumper sticker that said Zombie Patrol. I had to convince him to replace the worn tires because the ones that were on it were not safe, but he acted like they were fine as is. They were in pretty bad shape, and to be frank, needed immediate replacement. He rolled his eyes at me about it, but ended up taking my advice when one of his friends who's not a complete idiot told him the same thing I did. Later, went with him to look at some used tires he found to buy that were stupidly cheap, but they were pretty old, dry cracked, and cupped all over. For those who don't know what that means, it's when tires get uneven wear up and down because of vibrations and wobbling the wheels, which is generally caused by bad bearings, old tire rods, loose ball joints, etc. I said that no mechanic in the right mind would mount those tires because it's a safety hazard, and told the seller that they were not safe to use or sell, and he'd be better off taking them to the dump. My brother was not happy with me over that, but he ended up buying used tires in much better shape from a local business that sold and mounted them. In order to make the Ram a little better, I put some Lucas stop slip in its transmission, ran 2 cans of sea foam through the gasoline, and 1 more can in the oil. Then I deep cleaned his interior, hand-stitched shut the cuts in the seats, flushed the radiator, and coated the entire inside of the bed with that special spray paint that's specially made for it. The truck actually looked good, but the engine sounded like crap till I sea foamed it. I warned my brother to go easy on it as I don't trust the engine or the transmission on Dodges at high miles. Of course, he didn't listen. First thing he wanted to do after getting the Ram's first oil change and tune-up was a drag race with my Tundra, and that old motor oil came out nasty. There was actually chunks of gunk that came out in it. The seafoam likely broke all that crud loose, and it came to rest in the oil pan. My brother actually had to take the oil pan off just to clean it all out. But after all of that and a tune-up, the engine sounded a lot better. So I guess with the Ram running good, my brother felt like that meant his truck was now better than mine in every way, and he insisted we race. He had the 5-point Magnum V8, and I still beat him. And I mean, it wasn't even really a contest, and my truck is completely stock. And yes, he demanded a best 2 out of 3. I didn't even want to race to begin with, but did so one more time just to try and sate him. And I won again. But he still demanded another rematch and claimed he just needed to get the hang of the Ram. Well, I refused to race him again, so he started practicing racing down the strip repeatedly on his own with a friend timing him. I guess doing that had some bad effects on the engine because a few days later, the Ram started overheating. I looked at the coolant and saw bubbles popping up in the overflow while the engine was running. Yeah, he'd blown a head gasket from flooring the accelerator so much. At 200,000 plus miles on a Dodge engine, it wasn't a surprise to me. My brother was freaking out about it because the truck was undrivable, and he didn't have the money to fix the engine because he spent everything he had on everything that had already been done. I suggested running some gasket sealer called Steel Seal in it because it worked for a friend. Well, to my surprise, that stuff actually worked, and the engine went back to running normally. But it developed a tick later that got a bit worse with time. My brother drove that truck everywhere, and because he has some stupid need to compete with me, he decided to go camping last summer at the same time and place as me. I have an old camper trailer that a friend sold to me for $500 and I fixed up. And with the pandemic ruining fun for just about everything, I wanted to get out and enjoy nature for a few days. So you can imagine what my brother did. He went out and got a camper trailer too, and bigger than mine at that. Only it turned out to be in bad shape. And who had to help him fix it before going camping? Me. And his friend with the shop too, but mostly me, because he wanted to bring his daughter camping with him, and he needed his camper to be in better shape. I don't really know crap about woodworking, and most of the materials my brother got for the repairs were used crap he found online or laying around. Old used plywood, used pallets, 2x4s that I'm pretty sure were left out in weather for a while, and more. All stuff he got for free from people in the area and that wanted it gone. The camper needed half its floor ripped out, rotten wood in the walls replaced, the roof resealed, a new vent put in, and there was plenty of mold that had to be rebleached. We got that all fixed and cleaned up, and then my brother repainted it. Then he went camping in the same place as me, and it ended up turning into a friends and family camping trip with way too many people because he invited his friends and somehow convinced our parents to come along too. Imagine 2 old camper trailers surrounded by tents. That's basically how it was. And during the stay, my brother kept bragging about how he's got a camper and his friends don't, and all the work he supposedly put into it. And he didn't mention my helping him once. I called him out on it too, but my brother's friends took his side, including the one who actually helped with the work. at least till our parents told him to stop being a dick and tell the truth, which then got his friends laughing at him and saying he wasn't man enough to admit he had help. And later my brother confronted me and called me a mama's boy for sicking our parents on him, which made no sense at all, and I told him as such. I didn't sick them on him. They did that themselves because his ego wouldn't let him give credit where credit was due. So in response to that, he got drunk and we nearly had a fist fight. My parents ended up taking his daughter home early, and he really didn't seem to care. Just gave him an excuse to drink more and smoke pot. The next thing that went out on the Ram after the head gasket was the cold air intake. It was right after the camping trip too, and probably happened on the way home. The engine blew open the cone filter because he bought the cheapest one he could find. I wanted to put the OEM filter setup back in, but no, it just wouldn't be cool, as he said. About a year later, and the Ram needed a new radiator, water pump, and catalytic converters put in pretty much all at once, and my brother complained to me about the cost. And no, needing a new radiator and water pump was not related to the gasket sealer. The mechanic said they were on their last legs for some time already. The dash was also cracking and falling apart so bad that after a while, it was practically made of JB Weld and duct tape covered with spray paint. The used aftermarket headlights he was so proud of putting in went foggy as well. He also broke a U-joint in his drive shaft, and not from rough driving either. The U-joint broke at a red light in the middle of town. And then after all of that, his rear bumper got yanked off, and he wouldn't tell any of us how it happened. But I found out from one of his friends. He got drunk and thought it would be funny to prank someone by chaining their rear bumper to a post. They figured out what he did and moved the chain to his rear bumper instead. He was really drunk and gassed it hard enough that the rear bumper came right off. He couldn't report it to police or insurance, or he'd have gotten a DUI. I got a look at the damage, and the bumper was pretty much unusable, and the mounts were sheared. My brother and his friend with a shop found a replacement aftermarket steel bumper that was off of a junked truck and welded it on. Not sure if it was from another Ram or if they just got any old steel bumper and made it fit. They had to fix some dents in it with a hammer and a blowtorch, then rattle can painted it black. My brother refused to say how much the whole mess cost him, but I suppose that some good came of it. He avoided driving drunk since then, and before anyone chastises me over not doing anything about it, I was dang close to anonymously telling the local police he was drinking and driving. And then after all of that, it finally happened. I kid you not, a week before my brother's 30th birthday, he blew out his transmission, just got in his truck and tried to go to work when the transmission jerked and made a loud noise, then started leaking fluid and died. I told him to just cut his losses on the truck, but he insisted he could fix it. He found another transmission in a junkyard that was untested for like $200 and had it put in. It shifted a little rough, even after the fluid change, so I put Lucas in it for him and it seemed to make it better. But then that transmission died only 2 months later. He looked up the cost of a rebuilt transmission, and it's nearly as much as how much he paid for the truck. Plus, the mechanic advised he get an aftermarket cooler for the transmission if he was going to get it fixed. I think my brother finally had it at that point because he put the Ram up for sale. He's not going to get a lot for it in its condition. What with scrap metal, rust repair, a dead transmission, and an engine tick, its value is heavily diminished. And now he's blaming me and saying I should have prevented him from buying that piece of crap truck in the first place. I reminded him of how I warned him multiple times. What did he want me to do? Tie him up and lock him in a closet till someone else bought the Ram? He was adamant he wanted it and refused to listen to me. Our parents have called him an idiot that's just trying to pass the blame on me because he wanted a man's truck so badly that he didn't consider whether or not it was crap on wheels. He was warned. He didn't listen. I could have given him an "I told you so," but I think he got it enough from our parents. Right now, he's putting around in his ex-girlfriend's old Ford minivan, which she pretty much gave him out of pity because it looks like crap and isn't really worth anything. And he's got resting witch face anytime I see him driving it because he hates it so much. And with gas and used car prices being so high right now, I doubt he'll be getting a replacement truck anytime soon. My brother then got what he believed to be a brilliant idea. He wanted me to let him use my truck while I used the minivan he got from his ex, because he claimed to be a laughingstock among his friends now for the vehicle he's currently driving. Well, he hangs out with other people who are just like him, so it's probably true. But he still had to learn no as a complete sentence that day from more than one person. His initial reasoning was that he'd rather be seen in a boy's truck than a chick's car, and wonder why his ex dumped him. He absolutely went off on me for telling him no, then actually implied he'd just borrow my keys anyway. I told him if he takes my truck, I will have the cops on his butt. I've got a tracker installed, and there's a camera outside my apartment watching the truck, so he's not touching it. And then gaslit me and said it was my fault for getting a truck in the first place and making him want one. I said it wasn't my fault he sold his Baja, then asked him what entitled him to my primary vehicle more than me, just because his broke. Then he claimed he needs a better vehicle to get around when he has his daughter. I reminded him that his daughter had no bearing on whether or not he drove a minivan or truck, and it certainly didn't mean that he needed my truck just for my niece. In fact, the minivan was a lot better of a vehicle for him to be driving his daughter in anyway. Rather than admit defeat, he actually tried to get help from our parents by calling them on speaker in front of me, and they sided with me immediately, despite his pleas of being a daddy and need of a better vehicle for his little girl. My dad called him a man-child, and my mom told him to stop bugging me as none of this was my fault, and to stop trying to weaponize his daughter to get what he wants. They also agreed it was safer for him to drive the minivan with my niece riding with him, and that they hated that Ram anyway. He left in a huff and has avoided speaking to me for a week, but I still see him around. My brother is not a very good driver, and I will never let him behind the wheel of my Tundra, so long as it can be helped. Not that he ever let me drive his Ram anyway. He loved the joke that I couldn't handle a man's truck, but now he's so sore I won't let him use my truck that he's pouting and giving me the silent treatment. But I really don't care. I came here to rant after all. Honestly, it just sounds like he's jealous of you. It seems like you're much more carefree and you actually have wits about you. He's probably just jealous that you know more than him about vehicles and you can actually repair things yourself. You have to stop enabling them though. I'd stop helping him fix these vehicles of his. He needs to learn some consequences. If he makes irresponsible decisions, he needs to learn. He's definitely a man-child, and his reaction to being called that solidifies that. Update. Brother wants to LS swap his 01 Dodge Ram, and he's upset neither I nor my parents will lend him money he'd never want to pay back. I was supposed to be done posting here, but I guess I'm not. In my last post, I told a very long story about my brother and his insistence on buying a piece of crap Dodge Ram that I helped him fix up because I was too nice to say no. A lot went wrong with that truck, from a blown head gasket to the transmission dying, getting replaced, and then dying again, and he finally admitted the Ram was a lost cause. But it wasn't a surprise from me that he changed his mind. He didn't get any offers for the truck, mainly because he was trying to ask way more than it's worth. And you can only get so much money out of a polished turd. Since then, it's just been sitting in the front yard of the house of potheads my brother rented half a room in. Though actually, he's recently moved into that camper he bought and I helped him fix because the owner of the house added another tenant. So he gave up his space to live in the camper since it's parked alongside the house and he no longer has to share our room. Gives him more privacy, I suppose. Not sure if I'd trade my apartment for a camper though. Not unless I had to anyway. My brother supposedly gave up on the Ram, but he changed his mind when a friend of his told them they know a guy that offered to LS swap the Ram for him. Now I'm not the most knowledgeable person, but aren't LS's small block V8s? The Ram has a big block 5.7 Magnum. Quite a size difference between the two. Then again, I don't really know if the 5.7 qualifies as a big block either. And I suppose it's not the size of the engine, but the power. And my brother has his eyes set on an LS V8 engine in the junkyard. Out of what vehicle, I don't know, but it's apparently a working engine complete with a transmission and cooling system parts. And they want $1,000 for all of it. My brother wants to put that engine and transmission in his Ram, but he doesn't have the money. The guy who does LS swaps has offered to put the engine in for him for $2,000 if he does most of the teardown of the engine bay and gets the old engine and transmission out, as well as all of the needed parts ready. So now my brother has been going around asking friends and family to borrow $3,000, and no one will lend him the money, especially not me or my parents. I have the money, but I learned long ago not to ever lend my brother anything because he refuses to pay it back unless you make him. And even then, he tries to act like he doesn't remember owing anyone anything. He previously owed me $2,000 already, until I made him pay most of that back a year ago. He still owes me $400 of it, and I kept records because I frankly don't trust him. Our parents are not in a position to lend my brother money, even if they wanted to. My dad is retired with a bad back and knee and waiting on approval for government benefits, and my mom still works and is the primary bread earner for the house right now. My brother went to them begging, and they told him no, and he really made a fuss when they did. Soon after my brother left their house, I got a call from my parents telling me my brother was likely headed to see me next because they refused to lend him money. They said that he tried to use his daughter as an excuse again, and that he hates driving a minivan that he refers to as a chick car. He wants his truck back, and he figures if he puts GM parts in it, then it'll be hunky-dory. Yeah, I helped him with that truck so much, but the lack of appreciation for my help and his taking credit for the work I did, especially when I worked on a camper for him and he claimed he did all the work on it to his friends during the camping trip. Then turned his aggression on me when our parents told him to stop lying in front of everyone. My parents warned me that bro was likely on his way to see me next. And sure enough, a few minutes later, I saw his van pull in. He got out and then did some sort of walk around my Tundra. Twice. Yeah, he's clearly still mad I have a working truck and he doesn't. In my previous post, I talked about how he actually wanted me to trade vehicles of the minivan for my Tundra when his Ram died, and then threw a tantrum when I refused. Not only is that not a fair trade, but he acted like it was the most brilliant idea ever when he suggested it. Then practically had a meltdown when I told him his idea sucked. So until coming to my door to beg for money, he's not spoken to me in weeks. I opened the door and confronted him before he even knocked, and just so he wouldn't know our parents warned me, I asked him what he wanted. He beat around the bush, then gave me his whole crocodile tears sob story of needing the $3,000 for the LS swap. I swear, he worded it like I'd be giving money to orphans in need. I mean, he even did the bit with cupping his hands together. Just how much of a sap did he think I was? I told him to stop begging and reminded him of the money he's already owed me for years now, which he conveniently didn't remember, till I went into my closet and pulled out all of the old IOUs he signed, and the total of all those loans I had written down, as well as a dated record of every payment he'd made with a signature on each one, and the total of how much he still owes. There's no way he could forget how I made him sign that sheet every time he made a payment, and I stated as such. Then said I could never trust him to pay back anything, and could file to sue him tomorrow for what he still owes me if I wanted to. He was not happy and called me a douche. Then he complained that all he wanted before was for me to lend him my truck so he won't look pathetic. I told him he looked pathetic regardless of what he was driving, and I'll never let him borrow my truck, nor would I argue about it again. He got mad and said I sucked because I couldn't just give him a little help when he needed a leg up. I laughed when he said, "A little?" and yelled at him that I helped him a lot, and then listed off all of the things I could remember doing for him for the past 2 years. And he was never appreciative, took credit for stuff I did, and hardly ever gave me a thank you. He took advantage of my kindness and bled it dry, but now I'm fresh out. Then I told him he's the real douche, and I'm never lending to him again. Then told him to get out and not come back till he was ready to apologize to me. He left without another word. When I watched him from the window, he started kicking one of the tires on his van as hard as he could, till I think he hurt his foot, because he fell on his butt and then flipped me off when he noticed I was watching. He practically crawled into the van and drove off. A mutual friend has told me he's depressed now, but is going around and looking for ways to make extra money with odd jobs. Nothing wrong with honest work, but I also hear he's still begging for donations. The mutual friend even texted me a picture of a coffee can with "Truck Fund" written on it that my brother has been carrying around. I'm not putting any money into that can, that's for sure. I still think my brother should sell the Ram and cut his losses, but if he wants to put an LS engine in it just to keep it, then fine. I want nothing to do with it. I've had it with that truck and his attitude. I'm not going to help him with anything anymore till he decides to pull his head out of his butt. And it's deep up there too. Like, loves the smell of his own stank deep. Let's check in with the community and see what they think. Nana Boehm says, I had a younger brother like this. He lived with my mom and spoke to her terrible. He was 5 years younger than me. My mother moved and left him in the house to another state. He finally called me when he had no food. I told him I have 2 little kids and divorced. I am not taking care of a grown frickin' man. I gave him 30 days to get a job and save his checks for a place he found a girlfriend and screwed around with her instead at her house. At 30 days, I locked the deadbolt and he slept on the porch for 2 days. I walked right past him. On the 3rd day, he told me he learned his lesson. I told him he had 1 week to get a job or he was out for good. He walked to a sawmill and got a job. He walked every day. He did not have a driver's license. He just never got one. He stayed holed up in his room at mom's. I gave him $20 out of his check and held the rest. Once he had enough, we found an apartment he could afford, and I helped him from yard sales get what he needed to start out. No one helped me. I did everything myself. He never lived with anyone else but his wife and kids. Never went without a job, worked up to manager at the mill, and he died 2 years ago from a stroke during COVID, and I did not even get to tell him goodbye. But I made a man out of him. All you do is help this guy. He sounds pathetic. He lacks some serious maturity. Don't give him the money, and don't give in to helping him. He needs to work hard for the things he gets. Maybe that might help him respect himself and things more. Update. My brother sold his Dodge, blamed me for it yet again. Again, I'm back here to post. A fair bit has happened in the past weeks, so I'll split it into 2 posts. As many readers know from my previous post, my brother wanted to do some sort of LS swap on his 01 Dodge Ram 1500 after he blew up his transmission twice, but that pretty obviously fell through. He couldn't get the money together fast enough, and the LS engine and transmission he had his eye on for the project sold before long at all. I guess that made him admit defeat once again because he put the Ram back up for sale, and this time didn't price it too high and found a buyer in a matter of days. He ended up selling his Ram 1500 for half of what he was originally asking when he first tried to sell it. Somebody, I guess, who's a home mechanic, showed up with a long bed trailer and snatched it up. They said they already had an engine and transmission ready to go in the Ram. So I guess to them, it's a quick flip. I mean, it's had a lot of rust repaired, it's been repainted, the undercoating was redone, it's slightly lifted, it had a new radiator and catalytic converters put in, and they make aftermarket covers for those dashes that tend to fall apart. So I guess to a mechanic it's a quick flip that'd be in and out of his shop fairly quickly. My brother and I at the time still weren't speaking since I chewed him out when he came begging me for $3,000. So everything I know about the situation comes from mutual friends and our parents. My brother was still blaming me for what happened to everyone he could, not because I got a truck and somehow made him want one too. No, that ship has sailed. This time he's griping about how much money and work he had into that Ram only to get $1,500 back. A costly mistake indeed, and somehow it's my fault to him. And believe me, he's been asked how it's my fault, and I've heard he tried multiple different excuses, none of which made any sense. Excuses like, OP wouldn't give me the money to fix my truck or lend me his, and now I look like a chump. Or, it's all OP's fault I'm stuck in a freaking minivan. So helping me was the least he could have done. Even his pothead roommate said he was being a narcissist idiot, and that's saying something as I've met those guys and they are huge idiots. I've heard my brother was laughed at a lot for it by his friends. He tried complaining about me to mom and dad too, and they didn't let that slide. They called him out on everything, called him a jealous narcissist man-child, and then kicked him out of the house and said not to come back till he gets his head on straight, stops blaming his crap on others, and apologizes to everybody, especially me for projecting his problems onto. He can't keep their granddaughter from them anyway, as their mom brings the girl to their house instead of where my brother lives. My brother's friends told me he was basically spending all his spare time pouting and locked in his camper. One of them said they think he was actually crying in there and refusing to come out after he sold the Ram. If he hadn't been such a douche to me, I'd feel sympathy for him. But I'm fresh out of that after everything he's put me through. I heard he spends a lot of his spare time on his laptop and phone browsing used truck ads. But it's going to take him a while to afford anything with prices being so crazy right now. Plus, his standards. It's got to be a man's truck after all. Whatever he ends up getting. He can save up and get another Dodge or a Toyota like mine, or any other brand for all I care. Even a Honda Ridgeline would work. By the way, I'm not dissing that truck mechanically, just not a fan of the way it looks. He can't afford to sell his minivan anyway because it's his only source of transportation. Not that it's really worth much of anything. Though what he did next, none of us saw coming. He decided to turn that old van into some sort of homemade truck. I think this guy is really unhappy with himself, but that's up to him. He needs to step up and make some moves. Change his life around. It starts with him. He should look to you as inspiration to be a better man and not see that as a hindrance. What do you think? What would you do if this was your brother? Thank you for joining us today on rLounge. Before you go, be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell. If you have something you want to say regarding today's content, share that with us in the comments below. And stay tuned for part 2.